So we'll move on to the, I guess, comparatively cheerier When the Wind Blows. Drew, cheer me up a bit.
I sense already we may have different opinions on this next film, Scott. If you didn't know anything about When the Wind Blows, then I doubt the opening would clue you in at all. There may be some news footage at the very beginning, but the relatively upbeat David Bowie title song allows it to be dismissed as being like a music video. This footage then gives way to an animation in the distinctive style of Raymond Briggs, best known for Fungus the Bogeyman, and particularly the warm Christmas-time stalwart The Snowman, notable, amongst other things, for its near total lack of nuclear war.
Yes, it's one of its primary characteristics.
Certainly there's nothing to suggest that this is about the arrival of some missiles into the UK, beginning with the Megadeth. Death comes in particular to a sleepy Sussex village where our protagonist Jim and Hilda live. Jim and Hilda are, how to put this kindly, dippy bastards. With not the strongest grasp on current events and some very odd ideas indeed about the likeability of Joseph Stalin and how actually World War II was a good time. Jim in particular also has some very odd ideas about the differences between men and women. Putting faith in the government to know what it's all about, Jim sets about following a government-issued preparation leaflet and builds a shelter in his living room from doors, while his wife seems even more reality-detached and ill-informed as him, and seems generally more concerned about the wallpaper than being burnt to cinders by nuclear fire. After the missiles strike the country, Jim and Hilda continue to have little to no concept of the facts, and so go about the business of slowly succumbing to radiation sickness. The existence of this film was, I am pretty certain, entirely unknown to me until we came to organise this episode, so I'm coming to it entirely fresh, and my primary thought is, who was this for?
Yes.
The fact that it's by Raymond Briggs and it's animated immediately suggests it's for children. But it can't be, because I'm sure few children are going to understand Cold War tension and the symptoms of radiation overdose. Or indeed get much benefit from seeing an elderly couple slowly die for an unseen killer.
For kids.
Yes. In many ways, it feels like a public information film, as for much of its length, Jim is seen quoting from and referring to the government guidelines. Yet, no. Not least because more than once it critically points out disparities between local and central government advice. And also, public information films rarely get the feature film treatment. So, does that leave us a drama for adults? I guess? Or maybe a black comedy? Certainly, it seems to be trying in many points for humour, but in all but a handful it fails completely. Even otherwise absurd moments like the duo donning large paper bags that once contained potatoes. I think for me, much of why I did not enjoy this film at all is that Jim and Hilda are idiots. Not everyday folk a little unsure if confused or what to do in the event of such unprecedented calamity. Not people so rattled by the catastrophe and unwilling or unable to cope in the aftermath. No, the film almost seems to take pains to present Jim and Hilda as thick before the bombs drop, and as the fallout descends, so it seems does their IQ. Not a film I could recommend watching, I'm afraid, this one for me, Scott.
I always thought of them as being characters that are old to the point of dementia. That's why they keep getting mixed up. That's why their times keep slipping. That's why they keep thinking they're somehow back in World War II and all that stuff. And that maybe not necessarily excuses, but explains a lot of what they're saying and what's going on.
That's a possibility, certainly, although it makes it a really odd choice to show an old couple with dementia slowly being killed by radiation sickness as the plot of your film.
I mean, the central point of what you're saying there is still entirely valid. It's a weird film, and I'm not sure who it's for. That's kind of why I've always remembered it, because I think I saw this when I was young-ish, like 16, 15, something like that, when it showed up. And I probably just stumbled upon it and going, well, that looks a bit like Snowman. And you watch a little bit and go, well, this isn't the Snowman at all. This is strange. And it becomes a very damning critique of the advice given where you'd be able to, like, how you could survive a nuclear apocalypse by putting a couple of doors up against the wall, as though that's going to affect anything. The preparations that couldn't possibly done. And what's effective about it this time round is, if you are out in the sticks, if the communication's down and there's no one around to let you know what's happening, the absolute terror of not even knowing what's going around would be almost as scary as actually being in the thick of things. I mean, I'm sure I've said, but the characters are out in the country somewhere, so they're not immediately killed by nuclear explosion, but they're still close enough, I would guess, to get all the negative aspects of that, the fallout and radiation sickness and all that stuff. So between that and not having anyone around them, they seem to be up on a hill in the middle of nowhere, so there's no information coming to them at all, and that's almost as terrifying as the information that would be coming to them as well, I suppose. Yeah, I just find it's an interesting film, and it's a strange film to make. It's not, again, it's hard to recommend. It's almost worth watching only as a bizarre counterpoint to The Snowman, because it's something that's so fondly remembered as a kid classic, and seeing something that is so similar in style and execution, but entirely different aspects and point, gives it some, I would think, some interest to people who are of the same kind of age as us. But yeah, it's not the most it's definitely a much harder film to recommend than The Threads is, if you're in the market for some mid-80s glum nuclear holocaust survival one. It's certainly the least interesting of the two. I still really enjoyed the animation style.
It's a strange mix of the Raven Big style and then some sort of model shots and a bit stop motion as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought it does, I think, look quite effective for all that. But yes, as a tale of two buffoons surviving the apocalypse, it's perhaps less interesting than Threads by a long chalk. Perhaps not worth going out of your way to watch, I would suppose, but I still think there's something of interest in there. I still think it has some interesting things to say. Probably the critical issue with it in terms of this podcast is that there's not really anything that it says that's not better said in Threads beforehand. It covers the kind of inadequacy of preparations to survive and government preparations for Holocaust and this kind of thing. All that's covered much more effectively in Threads, so you may as well just watch that. So I clearly didn't hate it as much as you did. I don't know if that's because I had a bit more nostalgia for it, having seen this a good long while ago. But yes, it's certainly nothing like as essential viewing as Threads is.
Yeah, curiously, the whole dementia thing absolutely didn't occur to me while watching this, but when you say that, it suddenly makes the film make a whole lot more sense, at least those characters. Mm-hmm. It was really bothering me, but that makes sense. And particularly when you have things they just seem so scatty after, but again, it's not really setting them apart from how it was before, because the film almost seems at pains to set them up as that beforehand. But when they're saying, I'll just pop down to the shop. But if they really were that confused, would they not have gone to the shop? I it didn't seem to make an awful lot of sense, their actions and inactions. There's been this bomb, the government will make it right. Also, we need this now, I'll pop down to the shop, and but not being aware that the shop would be there, having some faith that it would be, but they never seem to actually go. So it's a bit weird in that terms. But even if, as I say, that makes a lot of the character make a lot of sense in some regard, okay? So then I'm taking on board your idea of seeing it like that. But at the same time, and as you said, you're good with it makes it even more harder. Who's the audience of this, and what's the point of that? What are you supposed to learn from a couple who, if they are suffering from dementia or something like that, what is there to learn from that? Because they wouldn't be able to cope with anything, let alone nuclear war. It's not representative of anybody. No,
there's an awful lot of lessons to take away from When the Wind Blows, other than nuclear war would be bad, I suppose. Yeah. Bad times for all. But
there's a quote here from Rotten Tomatoes from critic Barry Lapham, who called it absolutely brilliant. It was very subtly done, but the message more than gets through well. I don't think Barry Lapham's a very clever man, because what message? What message gets through? There is no message. And again, so I looked up the entry for this on Wikipedia, just hoping for if somebody had said something like this, these characters are supposed to be this or something like that. I can't find anything like that. But this is, once again, this has nothing to do with the film. It's more just Wikipedia's written by people who haven't a clue about anything, it seems. It's saying here that it's implied that their son has fallen into fatalistic despair. No. There's one scene, the dad phones the son and says, well, you should get prepared for this. And it seems to me that the son just thinks it isn't going to happen. Or if it does, there's nothing much you can do about it. But that's very, very far away from fatalistic despair. I think some people are getting entirely different things out of this film than I did.
Yes, and even if he did fall into fatalistic despair, he was right to do so.
Yes. But all you hear, like, say, only hear one half of the conversation, but the idea seems to be like, yeah, there's no point in making the shelter. Don't be silly. It's not going to happen. Not like, oh, we're all doomed. Because he's laughing at him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's... I mean, yeah, I suppose there's some interest in this film, particularly if you're familiar with The Snowman and the Snow Dog, or you read Fungus the Bogeyman Grown Up or something, because it's absolutely not what you might expect from Raymond Briggs, and it's interesting from that point of view. And again, though, there are bits in it that are clearly meant to be humour, and I laughed a couple of times, but like the really absurdist bit of like, well, we should have paper bags. Why do we have paper bags? I don't know. But then they're getting really ill and they put the paper bags on the bottom of their head and like... But now I'm thinking to a minute, and it didn't amuse me at all. I was like, what is this? Why are you doing that? Are you trying for absurd humour? Again, though, if you're right about them suffering from dementia, then that's just cruel. Like, what you're suggesting, there should be humour in the fact that they're so demented that they're putting paper bags on their head. Yeah, that has, if again, assuming that you're right about that, Scott, that has answered many questions and created a whole set of different ones about this film. I don't know what's going on with this. Just to move away from the story, go more to the production too. Animation about nuclear war by the person who wrote The Snowman, and it has a soundtrack by David Bowie, Roger Waters, and Genesis. That's odd.
Naturally, yes. There's not really anything about this film that's not odd.
Yeah.
It's very much a series of questions that no one was asking, but now we have the answer to them, and now we just need to back calculate what that question was, and then we can all be happy about it. Yes, a really, really strange film on a number of levels. I was quite glad to go and watch it again, but I don't think I would ever return to it after this. It's only interesting by virtue of the various weird things that are happening around it, and the people who made it, and the kind of style that it is, and it being so different from other films that he's done. And it is, of itself, as an artifact in isolation, not all that compelling, and certainly nothing like his highly recommended as Threads would be. This is just a curiosity for anyone who happens to have some sort of nostalgia for the Snowman and such like that. This would make an interesting little counterpoint to it, but certainly not highly recommended.
Yes. A very odd piece indeed.
Yes.